Oliver Crane shoved open the glass door so violently that papers flew off nearby desks. "You think you're untouchable." "Nicole," he snapped, his voice cutting through the office like a blade. "You're fired!" It was 8:57 in the morning. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, the quiet kind that sting worse than laughter. Across the open floor, Evelyn, the young analyst I'd mentored since her internship, lowered her gaze. No one moved. No one dared to. I stood there, fingers still resting on my keyboard, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Life has its battles, but your health is the one you can never afford to lose. Take a second today to schedule that annual checkup. I'd love to know where are you watching from if this story resonates with you. Tap the like button and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. For 17 years, I had been the corporate trust registrar of Westbridge Holdings, the person responsible for every verified share, every signature, every merger that built this company's fortune. My name wasn't on the lobby wall, but it was printed quietly at the bottom of every legal document they owned. Oliver Crane had been CEO for only 3 years. Young, bold, photogenic, the kind of man who measured worth by applause. He surrounded himself with people who nodded before he finished his sentences. I was not one of them. When I questioned a missing $22 million entry in the Innovation Fund, he called me a relic of the old guard. Today, he was finishing that insult in front of everyone. "You can collect your things," he said, smirking. "Security will disable your access in 3 minutes." My mouth felt dry, but I forced a calm I didn't feel. The only sound was the ticking of my old analog clock on the desk beside me, a gift from the former CFO. Samuel Brandt. The second hand moved steady. Indifferent, 8:57 a.m. I looked at Oliver, not defiant, just precise. 3 minutes, I said softly. "Before or after the report you asked me to finalize." A ripple of silence passed through the room. Even Oliver blinked, for the first time. He seemed unsure which one of us was being dismissed. Humiliation burned through my chest, but I swallowed it whole. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. The clock kept ticking, each second reminding me silence could wound louder than any scream. 17 years, that's how long I'd walked these same polished halls, long enough to know every echo of the building. They used to call me the living archive of Westbridge Holdings, half in jest, half in truth. My job title, Corporate Trust Registrar, didn't sound glamorous, but it carried the weight of everything that made the company legal, credible, and safe. Every share transfer, every merger document, every clause that held the empire together, it all passed beneath my pen before reaching the boardroom. I had started when Westbridge was still a mid-sized trading firm, back when integrity meant something. I was 27, quiet but relentless, the kind of woman who triple-checked signatures before going home. Then Oliver Crane arrived, a CEO who valued image over accuracy, applause over ethics. He was young, ambitious, the type who filled a room like a commercial jingle, loud, catchy, and impossible to ignore. When he first joined, he called me the compass of the old system. Back then, I almost believed it was respect. Last year, he promised me a promotion, Director of Corporate Integrity. I remember the meeting clearly. He leaned forward across the table, flashing that confident smile. "You've earned it. Nicole, you've held this place together for years." For a moment, I felt seen. But 2 months later, during the annual town hall, he announced the new director, Mara Vance, his personal assistant, a woman 10 years younger, quick with flattery, quicker with charm. The entire floor applauded. I didn't. Resentment burned quietly inside me. But I hid it well. Dignity was a skill you learned in survival. I smiled, congratulated Mara, and returned to my files. That night, I stayed late in the office, reviewing compliance records under the soft light of my desk lamp. I saw my reflection in the darkened glass, calm, composed, and utterly invisible. 9 years earlier, I had saved Westbridge from a shareholder lawsuit that could have crippled it. A merger clause had been misfiled, one that would have voided a $300 million acquisition. I caught the error and fixed it quietly. staying past midnight. A week later, Oliver stood on stage at the Global Market Summit, boasting about our flawless compliance record. He used "My line trust is not a line item, it's a legacy." He never mentioned my name. I never confronted him. Instead, I kept working one document at a time, one betrayal at a time, on my desk. Two objects never moved: an old analog clock and a silver pen. The pen had been a gift from Samuel Brandt, our former CFO, on his retirement day. "For honesty," he'd said, pressing it into my hand. I placed it beside the clock that morning, both ticking reminders of what still mattered. They sat in silence, the last witnesses of a loyalty slowly burning to ash. The numbers didn't lie, they never did. They just waited for someone brave enough to read them. It was a quiet Thursday evening when I first noticed the gap: $22 million labeled under Innovation Fund. A line item buried so deep in the shareholder ledger that most people wouldn't have noticed. But I wasn't most people. Reconciling numbers was my language, my discipline, my pulse. And this entry didn't fit. The trail ended abruptly, no corresponding transaction, no timestamp, no authorization code, just a ghost fund moving through the system like it had permission to exist. I spent hours tracing it, line by line, comparing timestamps with archived filings. Each new link led back to Oliver's pet projects companies he'd personally championed in his presentations to the board. Every number I uncovered tightened something in my chest. 22 million wasn't an accounting error, it was a siphon. The next morning, I printed the report, my fingers trembling slightly as the printer hummed. At 9:30 a.m., I walked into the financial review meeting. Oliver was already at the head of the glass table, jacket off, confidence radiating like perfume. The new CFO, Richard Haynes, sat beside him. Avoiding my eyes, I slid the folder across the table. "There's a discrepancy in the Innovation Fund," I said evenly. "It doesn't reconcile with the equity register." Oliver didn't even glance at the numbers. He leaned back in his chair, his smile perfectly rehearsed. "Nicole," he said, tone patronizingly calm, "you've been here long enough to know innovation requires flexibility. You're not paid to question my vision." I felt the burn rise behind my ribs, but I kept my face still. With respect, vision doesn't overwrite federal compliance. My voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it made the room colder. The silence that followed was suffocating. The CFO shifted in his seat, tugged at his cufflinks, but said nothing. He knew I was right. Everyone did. Yet Oliver's eyes stayed locked on me, daring me to push further, daring me to cross a line that would cost me everything. "I'll have the audit team review it," I said finally, trying to maintain the professionalism I'd built my reputation on. "There's no need," he replied, dismissing me with a flick of his hand. "Your time would be better spent preparing next quarter's reports." That was the moment I understood the hierarchy wasn't built on truth. It was built on obedience. And obedience had a price. By afternoon, my access to the internal compliance drive was restricted. When I tried to open the ledger again, a message appeared. Permission denied. Quiet anger settled into me like sediment in water, heavy, invisible, unshakable. They wanted silence. They expected it. But I'd learned long ago that silence can also be a shield. That evening, after everyone left, I sat alone in the dim glow of my monitor. I retrieved the backup drive from my drawer, an old silver USB I'd used for audits before the cloud migration. I downloaded everything: transaction logs, email trails, authorization codes. Then, on the final file, I added a single note before encrypting it, in case of silence. When I ejected the drive, the room was utterly still. Outside, the city lights blinked through the blinds, like 1,000 witnesses too afraid to speak. I locked the drive in the bottom drawer beside the silver pen Samuel Brandt had once given me. In that moment, I understood something I'd tried to ignore for years. This company wasn't about trust anymore. It was about survival. That night, I left the office knowing the silence around me wasn't ordinary anymore. It was strategy. The next morning, when Oliver walked in with that same calculated smile, I already understood what was coming. "You have 3 minutes to log out." Oliver's voice cut through the silence like a blade. The HR manager behind him crossed her arms, waiting for the spectacle to end. It wasn't about security. It was about control. 3 minutes to erase 17 years of work. 3 minutes to make me small. The air in the office felt heavier than usual, thick with the quiet satisfaction of witnesses pretending not to look. I lowered my eyes to the analog clock on my desk, the same one I'd bought on my first promotion. Its glass scratched, its hands perfectly punctual. The second hand clicked forward with surgical precision. 8:57 and 32 seconds, exactly as I had pictured. I opened the equity reconciliation portal, the system I'd built line by line years ago. Back when Solvex systems still valued precision, the interface loaded transaction codes, timestamps, custodial entries, ownership strings. My territory, Ms. Morgan. A nervous voice murmured. It was Kyle, the junior IT specialist, barely out of college. His badge still looked too new. His eyes darted from me to Oliver, who stood near the glass wall, checking his watch like a man already late for his next cruelty. "I need to disconnect your workstation. CEO's orders." I turned to Kyle. Slowly, deliberately. "I always finish what I start," I said. My tone wasn't angry, it was calm, precise, final. He froze. The HR manager exhaled sharply, impatient. Oliver glanced at her, then back at me, confident I'd simply log off and walk away. Instead, I began typing. My fingers moved faster than my thoughts, muscle memory guiding me through hidden directories and forgotten permissions. File after file opened archived transactions, unverified ownership logs, dormant shareholder accounts, a digital ecosystem only I truly understood. And then I saw it. A single blinking yellow line that didn't belong there. Pending custodianship, Nicole Morgan, 0.71%, Class A shares. My breath hitched. I opened the entry. The authorization bore 2 signatures, Oliver Crane and Samuel Brandt. The former CFO. Dated 4 years ago. A temporary transfer that had never completed because Samuel's retirement had frozen the process midstream. The verification schedule appeared beneath it. Next reconciliation. September 30th, 9:00 a.m. I looked at the clock again. 8:58 a.m. 2 minutes. That's all. In 2 minutes. The system would automatically reconcile all pending entries and lock the shareholder data for the entire quarter. Whatever existed at 9:00 would become permanent until December. Behind me, Oliver whispered something to HR, his tone dismissive, self-assured. He had no idea. Kyle stepped forward again, voice shaking. "Ms. Morgan, please." 2 minutes, I whispered, eyes fixed on the screen. "That's all I need." My heart drummed once, twice. Then everything inside me went still. I opened the verification tab. Every field was still live signature, timestamp, biometric validation. They hadn't revoked my credentials yet. They should have. I placed my thumb on the sensor. The scanner glowed faintly under the overhead light. Waiting. My reflection flickered on the dark edges of the screen. Same woman. Same calm expression, but sharper now. Click. A prompt appeared. Confirm custodian verification. The second hand on my desk clock crept forward. 8:59 and 58 seconds. 30 seconds. I murmured. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The hum of the HVAC filled the silence. Outside the glass wall, people kept typing, emailing, laughing, clueless that everything was about to change. 8:59 and 50 seconds. I pressed my thumb again. The scanner flashed green. Verification complete. Ownership confirmation pending update. 8:59 and 58 seconds. The tremor in my hand was gone. The air felt alive, electric, charged, ready. The clock on my desk ticked forward, landing exactly on 9:00 a.m. You can feel the storm coming. Can't you drop your prediction in the comments below? And don't go anywhere. What happens after this moment will change everything. Stay with me until the end. The line blinked on the screen. Almost too ordinary to be dangerous. Custodianship record, signature required. I clicked it open, expecting another dead end. Another reminder that all my years of precision had turned into background noise. But this file, this one was different. Two signatures gleamed at the bottom, like ghosts preserved in digital ink. Oliver Crane and Samuel Brandt. For a moment, the name pulled me backward in time. I could still see the day Brandt left Westbridge, the only farewell that had ever felt like a loss. His office had smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. He'd stood there, sleeves rolled up, his briefcase half-packed, that wry smile softening the exhaustion in his face. "You keep this," he'd said, handing me a small velvet case. Inside was a silver pen, engraved with the company's crest and my initials. "One day. This will remind you that integrity matters, even when it costs you." I'd laughed quietly then, promising I'd use it only to sign what I believed in. I never imagined that, years later, I'd be staring at his signature, my mentor's name, right beside the man who'd just fired me. The screen reflected my face faintly, pale under the sterile office light. I scrolled down, searching for context. A line of text appeared beneath the signatures. "Temporary custody. Revert next quarter." I frowned. That note should have been cleared years ago. Custodial shares were never meant to stay in limbo. They were placeholders for transitional equity after a merger. My department always followed up, always removed temporary holders before certification. But Samuel's retirement had interrupted that process. He'd signed the transfer. Oliver had co-signed, and the record had quietly survived every system update since. My fingers trembled as I expanded the metadata log. The verification schedule appeared in the upper corner, a tiny digital clock ticking down seconds. And there it was plain, simple, and world-altering quarterly update September 30th, 9:00 a.m. The words hit like static electricity. I turned slowly toward the analog clock on my desk. Its second hand crept forward, patient and steady, 8:58 a.m. For 17 years. I'd been the silent guardian of everyone else's details, the name that never made headlines, the woman who caught errors before they became disasters. And now, one uncorrected line, one overlooked clause, had circled back like poetic symmetry. If I confirmed my credentials before that 9:00 a.m. update, the system would lock my custodianship for the next quarter, legally certifying my ownership of those 0.71% Class A shares. It wasn't luck. It was logic meeting consequence. I inhaled slowly, feeling something I hadn't felt in months, hope. Cautious but alive. The kind that flickers not from faith, but from fact. My mind began to organize itself the way it always did before a critical audit. The timestamps aligned. The audit trail was clean. The system was still open. And for once, time wasn't against me. It was waiting for me to act. I imagined Samuel Brandt watching this unfold. That same half-smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He'd always said the system rewards clarity, even when people don't. Maybe he'd known, somehow, that this small oversight, this sliver of shared trust, would someday protect the only person who still followed his rules. Behind me, the noise of the office felt distant, irrelevant, the hum of machines, the shuffle of papers background to the quiet pulse of decision. I rested my fingertips on the silver pen beside the keyboard. The metal was cool, grounding. It wasn't revenge, I felt it was restoration. The realization that every late night, every unseen correction, every act of integrity had led me here, to this moment of improbable symmetry. The clock's hand touched 8:59 a.m. In exactly 60 seconds, the system would update, rewriting the future of Westbridge Holdings. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat on the login screen. My pulse tried to match it, but stumbled instead. Uneven and shallow. The room around me blurred the voices, the motion, the sterile glow of the office lights. I typed the final authorization code, and pressed enter. The biometric prompt appeared. Fingerprint verification required. My breath caught. I placed my thumb against the scanner. The same motion I'd done hundreds of times before. But this time, the machine hesitated a short, unnatural pause before flashing red. Error primary access revoked. For a split second, the words didn't register. Then they hit me like ice water down my spine. I'd been stripped of level 1 credentials. Of course I had. Oliver must have ordered it the moment he decided to humiliate me. The one safeguard that kept the system honest had turned against me. 30 seconds left. The analog clock ticked beside me sharp, unrelenting. I felt the weight of every second slide across my shoulders. Behind me, I heard Kyle's hesitant voice break through the ringing in my ears. Ms. Morgan, I have to unplug the terminal now. I didn't turn. My voice came out calm, though my hands were trembling. Give me 30 seconds. Kyle, I can't, he stammered. The CEO said, then wait until I'm done, I said quietly. You'll know when. He froze, torn between fear and decency. I focused back on the screen. The error message blinked again, taunting me. I closed my eyes. Somewhere in the back of my mind, Samuel Brandt's voice surfaced steady, patient, the way it always had been when he taught me systems logic. Never build a wall you can't open yourself. Leave a window, a human window. A memory struck me, the old version of the system. The one we'd designed before the global upgrade. We'd built in a redundant access protocol, a manual override for auditors. Most employees had forgotten it existed. I hadn't. I switched the interface to legacy mode. A gray text box appeared, buried under the new code. Manual verification, key required. My hand shook as I reached for the bottom drawer. Inside lay the silver USB I'd kept for years, the last physical key to the system before cloud integration. I inserted it, praying the drive still worked. The cursor froze. The system hesitated again, as if deciding whether to remember me. 20 seconds left. Kyle took another step forward. Please. Ms. Morgan, don't, I said without looking up. If you touch that cable, you'll shut down a verification record worth more than your annual salary. He stopped dead. I didn't blame him. None of this was his fault. 15 seconds. I entered the code from memory 12 characters, a pattern I hadn't used since Brandt's final week at the company. The line blinked. Processing. I could feel sweat tracing down my back, the air thick and slow. The system paused for what felt like an eternity. 10 seconds. Then, a new message flashed. Secondary verification accepted. Biometric fallback required. I lifted my hand again, pressing my thumb harder this time. The scanner hesitated, glowed amber, then turned green. 5 seconds. The clock's second hand moved a clean, merciless sound. I held my breath. Verification complete. Ownership, confirmation, pending update. For one terrible heartbeat. Nothing happened. The progress bar crawled forward, stalling at 98%. I could hear my own pulse louder than the office noise. Then a soft chime. Ownership confirmed. Custodian lock enabled. The timestamp blinked beneath it. 8:59:58 a.m. I stared at the screen, unable to move. The fear drained from my body all at once, leaving behind a strange stillness, the quiet that comes only after surviving something you weren't supposed to. Behind me, Kyle exhaled a shaky breath. Is it done? I turned toward him, the hint of a smile flickering at the corner of my mouth. It's done, I said softly. 2 seconds to spare. The clock ticked to 9:00 a.m., and for the first time that morning, I felt the room exhale with me. The phone rang once, sharp and loud, shattering the stillness that had settled over my desk. I didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. Only one man in this building called with that kind of desperation. I answered on the second ring. Nicole. Oliver's voice trembled through the receiver clipped. Breathless. The sound of a man trying to keep control. What did you do for a heartbeat? I said nothing. I wanted him to feel the silence. The same silence I'd swallowed when he'd fired me in front of everyone. Then, calmly, I replied, finish the protocol you forgot to remove. He inhaled sharply. I could hear shuffling on the other end, the rustle of panic, of papers hitting the floor, of HR's anxious voice cutting through the chaos. Sir, she's in the shareholder list. The corner of my mouth lifted slightly. I didn't smile often, but this wasn't amusement. It was recognition. The inevitable had finally arrived. And no one, not even Oliver, knew what to do with it. Impossible, he hissed, his confidence unraveling in real time. You were supposed to lose access. You can't be in there. I leaned back in my chair, eyes flicking toward the analog clock on my desk. The second hand swept across the dial with perfect indifference. 9:00 a.m. Right on schedule, I told you, I said quietly. I finish what I start. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, I could hear him muttering to someone, "Aight, maybe, or legal." His words came out fractured, desperate. Revoke her credentials. Right now, a muffled answer followed. Barely audible. Sir, we can't. She's listed as a primary shareholder. The system's locked. The line went silent. Then, finally, Oliver spoke again, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. You're the owner now. The words hung between us, thick with disbelief. I looked at the flickering cursor on my monitor, the system confirmation message still open, glowing faintly in pale blue. Ownership confirmed. Custodian, lock enabled. I let out a soft breath. No. Oliver, I said, voice level and steady. You just signed it that way. He didn't speak after that. I imagined him staring at the same realization I'd faced minutes earlier, that the system he'd weaponized against me had followed his orders too perfectly. I could almost hear the hum of fluorescent lights on his end, the sound of humiliation settling into the air. Behind him, HR was still shouting, What do we do? She's on the internal register, someone else, maybe his assistant, whispered. If she has custodian rights, she can call for a board audit that broke him. Stop talking, he snapped. But his voice cracked in the middle, collapsing under the weight of fear. Meanwhile, I sat there, surrounded by the quiet rhythm of my office. The same space where he'd humiliated me, not long ago now, felt different, smaller somehow. Contained. My reflection in the dark monitor looked unfamiliar, the same face, but sharper around the edges, defined not by anger, but by clarity. I watched the clock's second hand tick past 12 again. The precision was soothing, like a metronome guiding me through the moment. Every sound his panic. Their confusion existed on a frequency that no longer reached me. Nicole! He tried again, his voice breaking into fragments. You don't understand what this means. Oh, I murmured, eyes still fixed on the clock. I understand exactly what it means. The call disconnected a second later. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things unsaid, of truths finally reclaiming their place. Across the room, the morning light broke through the blinds, scattering thin bands of gold over the desk. The silver pen glinted beside the clock, the same pen Brant had given me years ago. The clock struck 9:01, its tick slicing cleanly through the quiet. For the first time all morning, I allowed myself to exhale, not relief, not joy, just the still satisfaction of order restored. From my desk, I could see everything through the glass wall, the chaos blooming inside Westbridge's executive conference room, like a storm contained behind glass. Oliver stood at the center, red-faced, his voice muffled but frantic, a man clawing at a system he no longer controlled. The same man who had fired me less than 15 minutes ago was now surrounded by people who couldn't even look him in the eye. It started with the simplest sentence flashing across the main monitor. Access denied. Insufficient privileges. That phrase spread panic faster than fire. Phones lit up, screens froze. And for the first time in years, the mighty Westbridge command floor went silent. Then came the shouting urgent. overlapping voices as Oliver demanded someone fix what was happening. Reset the keys. Override the lock, he barked, but there was no override. His assistant, Mara Vance, the same one he'd promoted over me, darted across the room to a workstation, typing furiously. "Sir, I'm in the system logs," she said, voice shaking. "But the authentication loop, it's sealed." Oliver leaned over her shoulder. "Then, unseal it." Mara's hands trembled as she scrolled through the log trails. Her face went pale when she found the line she wasn't supposed to see. Lock protocol initiated. Signature S. Brant, she looked up slowly. "Sir, it's locked by Samuel Brant's authority." The room erupted. The CFO swore under his breath. Its staff whispered in disbelief. And Oliver slammed his fist against the table so hard, his watch clattered to the floor. He's been retired for years. That's impossible. But it wasn't. Brant had always known how to protect what mattered. I remembered his words the day he left Systems Change. But people don't. So I built something that listens to people, not titles. And that was exactly what was happening now. I turned away from the scene, the sound of their panic muffled by glass. The smell of burnt espresso drifted faintly from the break corner behind me. I walked over, poured myself a cup, and stirred it slowly, the spoon tapping the ceramic like a metronome marking the seconds. Through the haze of noise and movement, my phone buzzed once, a company-wide notification. My pulse quickened as I read the subject line, "Quarterly confirmation by authorized custodian. Sender Samuel Brant automated system trigger." The message had gone out to every shareholder, every board member, every major investor. Brant's old contingency still lived within the system, a final safeguard to announce the verified custodian of record. And that custodian, by design and by oversight, was me. For a long moment, I just stared at the notification. The irony felt almost poetic. Even after his departure, Brant was still protecting me, or perhaps protecting the principles he'd believed in. Either way, he had built a bridge between justice and timing, and somehow, I was standing exactly where it led, behind the glass. Oliver shouted something I couldn't hear. Mara was crying now, her hands in her hair, surrounded by screens filled with frozen command prompts. The legal director gestured helplessly toward the locked database. The words "custodian access" active glowed on the main display like a quiet verdict. I took a sip of coffee. It was slightly bitter, but grounding. My reflection shimmered faintly on the window in front of me, composed. Still, detached from the chaos on the other side. It wasn't victory I felt. It was something colder. Steadier, the peace that follows inevitability. The analog clock on my desk ticked in rhythm with the scene. 9:15 a.m. Its sound was constant, indifferent. The heartbeat of order reclaiming itself. Oliver turned then, meeting my gaze through the glass for the first time since he'd fired me. His lips moved, but whatever he said was lost to the soundproofing. I didn't need to hear it. The scene spoke for itself, a leader undone by his own arrogance. A system bound by the integrity he'd tried to erase. I set my cup down, letting the warmth fade from my fingers. On the other side of the glass, their world was collapsing in noise and motion. And in mine, everything was finally quiet. The summons came less than an hour later. A paralegal delivered it to my desk, his hand trembling slightly as he placed the folder in front of me. Legal conference, immediate attendance. It read, no explanation, no courtesy, just the clipped urgency of panic disguised as authority. When I entered the room, 3 people were already waiting, 2 corporate attorneys I'd never met, and a junior counsel barely in his 30s. Sleeves rolled up, trying too hard to look composed. He was the first to speak, and his tone carried the arrogance of someone who still believed power came from volume. "Ms. Morgan," he said, voice sharp, "you're to return what's not yours. Immediately!" His words echoed for a moment, heavy in the silence that followed. I placed my laptop on the table, flipped it open, and waited for it to boot. "You'll need to be specific," I said evenly. "What? Exactly?" Isn't mine, he scoffed. The custodial shares. The system glitched. You exploited it? I didn't argue. Instead, I turned the screen toward him. The Westbridge ledger appeared the core record system, the one no one could alter without leaving a trace. The display showed two digital signatures glowing side by side, Oliver Crane and Samuel Brandt, time-stamped and verified by the Internal Equity Registrar. Tell me, I asked quietly, which part of this looks accidental to you? The young lawyer's confidence wavered for just a second. Then, recovering, he said louder. We'll take this to court. What you've done constitutes unlawful retention of corporate property. Under state law, I cut him off gently. Not with defiance, but with precision. You're referring to Delaware Code. Section 157. Yes. He blinked. What I continued. Calm and deliberate. The statute governing the rights and issuance of stock options and custodial transfers. You'll find that subsection A clearly states that if shares are duly authorized and issued under verified signatures prior to revocation, they remain legally binding until the next scheduled board vote. The room went still. I turned the screen further so all three lawyers could see the timestamp. That verification occurred at 8:59:58 a.m., prior to any board notice, termination letter, or credential removal. By law, your law that makes the transaction valid. He stared at me, mouth half open. The other two exchanged uncertain glances. The youngest one swallowed hard, the sound loud in the silence. You memorized it, he muttered, disbelief replacing his earlier arrogance. I used to review your filings before they reached the board, I replied, voice soft but firm. It's my job to know what you overlook. The senior counsel leaned forward, scanning the screen as if he could will a loophole into existence. His face drained of color as he found the time-stamped metadata. The code strings shimmered, immutable and undeniable. No edits. He whispered, no overrides. It's clean. The younger lawyer tried again, voice cracking. Even if that's true, even if we can still file for injunction, the board won't accept this. I closed the laptop slowly, the click of its hinge echoing like a period at the end of a long sentence. You can file whatever you like, I said, but you might want to consider the optics of a company suing its own registered custodian, especially when every shareholder in Delaware just received a system-generated confirmation. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was different now, not defiant, but fearful. The kind that settles in when people realize the rules they've bent for years suddenly have teeth again. The junior counsel's face had turned pale, his earlier confidence gone completely. He looked at me, but his gaze slipped downward the same way people look at a force they can't quite comprehend. A quiet understanding passed through the room. I wasn't a victim anymore, and they knew it. I gathered my things with deliberate calm, tucking the laptop under my arm. Next time, I said softly, read the law before you quote it. As I stepped out, I could still feel their eyes on me, not with anger, but with the unease of people who'd just met the limits of their own authority. The email confirmation arrived just after noon, a simple line of text that changed everything. Shareholder verification 0.71%. Equity confirmed. That number, so small on paper, carried a weight that could tilt an empire. With it, I had the one thing Oliver Crane had never imagined I'd possess again: legal standing, according to Westbridge bylaws. Any verified shareholder with voting equity exceeding 0.5% could formally demand a forensic audit, and I intended to use that right quietly, precisely, and without apology. I printed the confirmation, placed it neatly into a file, and walked past the same glass corridor where I'd been fired hours earlier. The whispers followed me this time too, but they carried a different tone, uncertainty instead of pity. No one dared stop me as I entered the administrative suite and requested a meeting with the audit committee. The compliance officer, a woman named Teresa Holt, looked up from her desk with wide eyes when I showed her the ledger copy. You're a shareholder, I nodded. as of 8:59 and 58 seconds a.m., verified by the system and confirmed by the registrar. She blinked, then hesitated. You're within your rights to file for a forensic audit. Then let's file, I said softly. Behind the glass walls of the executive boardroom, chaos had erupted again. Oliver's voice boomed, muffled through the glass but unmistakable. He was shouting orders, waving his phone, trying to summon control that no longer belonged to him. The once invincible CEO now looked like a man cornered by his own reflection. He tried to call an emergency shareholder meeting, barking commands to IT to reauthorize his privileges. Within seconds, a message flashed on every monitor in the room. Executive privileges suspended. Verification pending custodian clearance. The phrase might as well have been written in stone. The system didn't just freeze him out, it publicly documented it. I could see him through the glass, red-faced, tugging at his tie as if oxygen itself had turned on him. His assistant was crying again, clutching a folder of useless override codes. The same man who had once said, "You're not paid to question my vision," now stood helpless before a machine that obeyed mine. Meanwhile, the forensic team worked in silence. Within the hour, their preliminary report began compiling. Teresa handed me the tablet, her expression unreadable. "You'll want to see this." I scrolled through the findings. Hidden accounts, shadow transactions, transfers from the so-called Innovation Fund traced to a private entity under Oliver's initials O.C. Enterprises, registered offshore 2 years earlier. The digital trail was flawless. And, ironically, it was preserved by the same integrity protocols I'd built into the system years ago. My name was on those lines of code, invisible but absolute. For a long moment, I didn't speak. I felt neither triumph nor rage, just a deep, quiet understanding that truth had finally realigned itself. Teresa whispered, "This is criminal. Nicole, this could bring him down." I looked at the screen one more time, then closed the report. "No," I said softly. "It will bring clarity. The rest is up to the board." On my desk sat the silver pen, the one Samuel Brandt had given me on his last day, engraved with fine scratches from years of use, for 17 years. It had been a symbol of restraint, of silent work behind louder men. But today, it had a new purpose. I uncapped it slowly, the faint metallic click echoing like a punctuation mark in the room's tense silence. I signed the request form with deliberate strokes, each letter steady and unhurried. Initiate audit. When the ink dried, I placed the pen down beside the analog clock. The second hand moved in perfect rhythm, as if measuring not time, but restoration. Through the glass, I could still see Oliver pacing, shouting, denying, but his voice no longer reached me. He was a man undone by the very systems he had tried to manipulate. I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness grounding, familiar, around me. The office hummed with the quiet energy of correction, a company finally inhaling after years of deceit. For a long while, I simply watched the clock tick toward 1 p.m., feeling neither anger nor joy, only the steady calm of balance returning. Brandt's pen had fulfilled its purpose. Justice, I realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply signs its name in silver ink. The boardroom had never felt so full, yet so fragile. Every seat around the long mahogany table was occupied, the air thick with anxiety and the faint hum of whispered speculation. Oliver sat near the end, flanked by his counsel, a sheen of sweat darkening the collar of his expensive suit. His smile once effortless, commanding looked artificial now, stretched thin over panic. "This entire situation," he began, his voice strained but loud enough to command attention, "is a technical malfunction, a temporary misfire in the verification system. The custodial record was never meant to transfer ownership. This was an administrative glitch." The words hung in the air like smoke, visible and unpleasant. Across the table, the board members exchanged cautious glances. They had all seen the confirmation email from the system, the one bearing both his and Brant's signatures, time-stamped before his attempt to revoke access. "Mr. Crane," said the chairman slowly. Our legal review team verified the timestamp. The system did what it was programmed to do, exactly what you authorized 4 years ago. Oliver's jaw tightened. "It's still a breach." He snapped. "A clerical oversight shouldn't cost me my authority." This, interrupted a calm, gravelly voice, "isn't about clerical errors." Every head turned toward the far corner of the table, where Mr. Alden Vance Evelyn's father and one of Westbridge's founding shareholders leaned forward. His silver hair caught the light, his tone steady but firm. "Samuel Brant warned us about this clause before he retired. He told this board, in writing, that if management ever tampered with custodial records or bypassed internal verification, the system would automatically protect itself." None of us listened. The room fell quiet. Even Oliver didn't speak for several seconds. The faint sound of the wall clock filled the pause a rhythmic, impartial witness. I sat across from them, silent, my hands folded over the same silver pen Brant had once given me. I hadn't asked for this seat. I hadn't asked for this power. But now that it had been forced upon me, I knew exactly how to use it with restraint, not retribution. The chairman cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Mr. Crane, in light of the confirmed records, the verified custodianship, and the findings of the audit." He paused, looking around the room, then continued clearly. "The board has decided to suspend your executive privileges, effective immediately." Oliver shot to his feet. "You can't!" But the chairman's voice rose, firm and final. "We can, and we are." He turned toward me. "Ms. Morgan," he said with deliberate respect, "in recognition of your legal standing and your role in stabilizing the company's compliance infrastructure, this board unanimously appoints you interim compliance director, effective immediately." For a moment, the words didn't feel real. The title sounded distant, almost foreign, as if spoken to someone else. I felt every eye in the room shift toward me, some hopeful, some uncertain, a few relieved. I stood slowly. "I accept," I said, my voice calm. "Even then," after a pause, "for stabilization only. This isn't about replacing leadership, it's about restoring trust." A quiet ripple passed through the room, the kind that precedes something larger. Then, one by one, people began to rise. It started with Evelyn's father. He stood, nodding toward me with something that looked like respect. Then another board member rose, followed by another, until the entire room was on its feet, not in formality, but in acknowledgement. Applause filled the space where, hours earlier, Oliver's voice had dominated. It wasn't loud or celebratory. It was deliberate, grateful. Across the table, Oliver sat back down slowly, his expression hollow. He wasn't looking at me, he was staring past me, at the glass walls, at the reflection of a man who no longer recognized himself. I met his gaze only once, offering neither victory nor pity. "Mr. Crane," I said quietly, "I suggest you cooperate with the auditors. The company deserves closure." He said nothing. As the applause continued, I felt something shift inside me, not pride, not triumph, but clarity. The kind of calm that comes when truth no longer needs defense, when the meeting adjourned. I gathered my papers and the silver pen. It gleamed faintly under the boardroom lights, catching the reflection of a company trying to steady itself again. Outside the window, the city pulsed on, indifferent, continuous. Inside, order had finally returned, and for the first time since 8:57 a.m., I no longer felt like an employee discarded by her system. I felt like its conscience, restored. A week later, the world felt quieter. The chaos had settled, the press had moved on, and Westbridge was finally breathing again. In the corner office overlooking the skyline, I sat behind a desk that still didn't quite feel like mine. The walls smelled faintly of fresh paint and polished wood. The analog clock, my old one, the one that had witnessed everything, ticked steadily from its new place beside the window. And next to it, gleaming in the morning light, lay Samuel Brandt's silver pen. The days since the board meeting had passed in deliberate rhythm, back-to-back reports, recovery plans, system stabilizations. The company was healing, cautiously but surely. The forensic audit had confirmed every hidden account, every shadow transaction. Westbridge's stock had steadied, investor trust had started to return, and for the first time in years, compliance reports were being filed on time, and honestly, outside the glass. The city moved like an endless current of silver and gold. I watched it quietly between calls, my reflection overlapping the skyline. It was strange, seeing myself here not as the woman who had been humiliated in front of her peers, but as someone the company now depended on, not as a reaction, but as balance restored. The phone buzzed once on the desk. A private message. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. The sender's name blinked across the screen, Oliver Crane. You planned this. The message was short, no greeting, no punctuation beyond that single accusation. I stared at it for a moment, feeling no anger, no triumph, just an odd sort of sadness for a man who still couldn't see the truth, even after it had unfolded in front of him. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I typed back. No, Oliver. Brandt planned for honesty. You signed for arrogance. I hit send and let the silence that followed settle naturally. He didn't reply. I didn't expect him to. Some endings don't need conversation. They just need recognition. The sunlight shifted, glancing across the surface of my desk, catching the silver pen and scattering soft reflections across the papers. The warmth of it felt different now, not harsh or blinding, but calm, measured. I leaned back slightly, watching the clock's second hand move in its steady circle. Each tick was familiar, grounding. I realized I hadn't truly listened to that sound in years. Back then, time had been something to outrun. Now, it was something to honor. The digital monitor blinked once as the system completed its daily cycle. A notification appeared at the top corner of the screen, compliance restored. I let the words sink in. Simple, unadorned, final. It wasn't just a system message, it was a declaration. The company's integrity was intact again. And perhaps, in some quiet way, so was mine. From the hallway came the muffled hum of normal work-life phones ringing, printers humming, the occasional laughter of interns who hadn't yet learned to fear the walls of corporate power. I smiled faintly. Maybe they never would have to. The silver pen gleamed again as the sunlight brightened. I picked it up, rolling it between my fingers, feeling the weight of its history. It was more than an heirloom, it was a reminder that honesty, once planted, had a way of surviving neglect. Brandt had understood that. So had I. And somewhere, beneath all the noise and betrayal, the company had remembered too. Outside, the city continued its rhythm cars gliding through intersections, trains humming in the distance, people moving toward their own stories of failure and redemption, everyone trying, in their own way, to rebuild what was once lost. I looked back at the screen, at those two quiet words, compliance restored. They weren't flashy. They didn't demand applause, but they meant everything. The clock ticked once more. Steady as truth itself, justice doesn't shout. It ticks just like the clock that never stopped. If this story touched something in you, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe that honesty still matters, even when it costs you, tap the like button. Share this story with someone who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe for the next one. Because sometimes, the quietest victories are the ones that stay with us the longest.